Hello and welcome back. I'm Jess Campmans, guided by Equus, and this is day 4 of the 12 Days of Christmas Horse Wisdom Life Lessons Learned, guided by Equus. I'm back in the pre-recording session because our internet has been so sketchy lately that I'm having a tough time getting these videos uploaded. Sometimes it seems like doing it live would be better, and other times it seems like recording it would be better. So today I'm trying recording it and sharing it this way, and we'll just keep going back and forth, which is kind of, I guess, how we're meant to live, is just being able to adapt to the circumstances that we're dealt with and not get frustrated through having to change what we had laid out or planned or designed for ourselves. So just kind of taking a breath and dropping into that space. I want to share today's story, I guess, is it doesn't really necessarily have to do with one horse in particular, although I guess it kind of does and it kind of also doesn't. And part of what I had a few things written down for these 12 days, and one of them was, what is your untold story? And part of my untold story was the fact of when I got kicked in the head when I was 7 years old. I was riding my horse Sam, who was that Appaloosa horse that I had talked about in day 1. And actually, so it was when I was 6 years old, for about the 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas, I would walk down to the end of the driveway and I would, by myself, I would walk down to the end of the driveway and I would wish upon a star, because that was where the least amount of light was, and I couldn't really leave the yard because I was only 6. But I remember every night wishing on a star that I would be able to get my own horse for Christmas. And that Christmas, there was a horseshoe in each one of our stockings. There were 4 of us kids and 4 horseshoes, 1 in each stocking. And right away I knew that there was a horse in the corral, so I got dressed and I ran outside, and he didn't end up becoming our kid's horse. He ended up becoming my horse. And so that was in 1986, and in 1987 I was riding him, and I remember this bird flying up between my dad and I. We were out on a trail ride, a bird or a piece of something, I'm not sure. And he kind of jumped sideways and I let go and I fell off, but my foot got caught in the stirrup. And so as he went to jump over top of me to clear me, his hind foot, to my understanding, came and hit me in the head, and I fractured, I don't know if you can see it, but I've got a scar that goes from here all the way back behind my ear, and I fractured my skull in various places. And I didn't know this till a couple of years ago, but I went unconscious. And I didn't actually, so it took me, I remember still being in the hospital. That happened 2 weeks before my birthday, so the beginning of May. And I remember still in the middle of July being in the hospital. I think I started grade 3 in September, but I might have to check my timeline with that. But I remember the doctor asking me, well, you're not ever going to ride horses again. And I looked at him and I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, look what happened to you. I said, of course I'm riding horses again. And he said, don't you have any fear? And I said, no, not at all. And all I wanted to do was get back on my horses. And part of my experience with getting kicked in the head and going unconscious actually would set kind of the stage for me to be able to come back to that aspect of that entire scenario or situation and learn the deeper meaning or the life lesson as to why that happened. And there was bits and pieces that had kind of come to me through doing shamanic work, being with the horses, kind of doing shamanic journeys, tapping into my soul, finally actually reading my own astrology chart, my own natal birth chart. And I'd had astrology readings before, but nothing really indicated what that was. Now, whether I wasn't asking the right questions or who was doing the readings just didn't notice that, I'm not too sure. But the point of this being is that once again, the horses led me to discover the answers that I needed to find, because when I found them through a pathway that I discovered them, it was so much more relative to what I found out. And so having had astrology readings before, I finally knew enough to kind of print off my own chart. And so I printed it off for the day that the accident happened. And in doing that, I actually became really acutely aware of a number of things that were going on. And not so much that I know how to read astrology. I mean, there's the sun and the moon, and then I've had to learn a number of what the other planets mean. It actually is quite intriguing to me. But what I began to realize is that there was a whole bunch of things going on that no one had really ever told me about. Or maybe they had, and I didn't understand what they were saying because they were using astrologers' terms, which kind of was way above my head and really held no meaning for me. But what I began to see as just noticing things was that I had a whole bunch of planets. And so planets are archetypes of energy in my 8th house. So an astrology chart is divided into houses, and each of the 12 houses represents an area of our life and our relationship with life, and that is that coincides with what our own personal aspects, how they line up within these different houses. So kind of like a house contains your family. One house is actually the house of the family. One house is the house of self. One house is the house of childhood, of the mother, of the father, of relationship to spirit. I'm not an astrologer, so I'm not very well versed in this. But what I looked at it and I saw was I had a whole bunch of personal planets, so personal aspects of myself in what's known as the 8th house. And the 8th house in astrology is about the occult and death and rebirth and mystery and mysticism and the dark and places where most people are afraid to go. And I kind of got initiated into that prior to my 8th birthday by going unconscious and facing death. And it's interesting because my experience in life in relationship to my horses, like I shared earlier, I've had a lot of equine deaths in my life that helped me really open up to what all of this means for me. And if it wasn't for my horses, for my horse Sam kicking me in the head and having me go unconscious to basically have kind of a near-death experience, and then losing all of these horses in the journey from between being 8 years old, because then I think I shared before, or maybe I hadn't shared that part of the story. So after that happened in 1987, where I got kicked in the head by my horse Sam, and then a year or 2 years later, he died. And so that was my first horse, and my first horse death happened within a period of less than, I would say, 2 years. Not only my first horse, my first really traumatic accident, and then a really traumatic death, because he got chased into a pole that he drove right through his chest and through his heart, and he was chased in there by another horse. And I didn't witness this, but my dad came and got me and my sister at school and told us this. And so in it, the experience of all of that, and then a number of these other horse deaths, and how that relates to this whole 8th house deal in astrology, is that capabilities lie in being able to go into the dark and find the missing pieces of the puzzle and transforming them through death and rebirth. Now, I wouldn't have been able to piece all of that together or even put it into words prior to probably this last year, because I spent most of this journey of learning how to be guided by the horses in the last 10 years, really discovering how to tune into them and realize what they were trying to share, and at the same time tuning into me, because it's not a one or the other, it's a both. They're always trying to share what aspects we need deeper revelation on. And so what they kept sharing and showing me is these pieces of myself that I didn't understand, and they would lead me and kind of guide me to find these ways, these pathways of learning how to find the answers for myself. Because when we do that, when we find the answers for ourselves, for what it is that we're looking for, we actually enable our own innate authority and power within us that no one can ever take away from us. Once we find that and enable it for ourselves, that is embodied within us, and then it becomes the embodied way of how we live our life, and we can teach others because we've actually gone out and sought the experience to learn the lesson. Again, I think I've already shared this in one of the other days, but as we seek that experience, as we seek the answer, we move through the experience, and then we can share that outside of ourselves. And so I hope I'm making sense with all of this. But what I realized is what the horses have kind of gifted me with through their deaths and the traumatic experiences I've had in relationship with them is this uncovering of my ability to be this bridge between worlds and go where most people are scared to go, which is into the realm of death and the darkness, and find those pieces and those aspects that the horses willingly are guides for us to go there. Because oftentimes those places that we most fear going are those places that really help us find the answers that we need. And so it really, if it wasn't for them and me needing to know why these horses kept dying in my life, I wouldn't have uncovered all of these other pieces of the puzzle that actually led me to discover the reason behind all of these deaths, which is helped enable myself to recognize this ability to go into the dark and find, which is the subconscious, the unconscious parts of ourself and the world at large, and find these pieces of information, of truth, of what actually happened, rather than the memory that we have of it, because those are two different things. And when we can do that and bring it back, we bring it back to life in a way that is undeniable. And I hope I'm not getting too far in speaking in the bigger picture, because I kind of tend to do that. But so this untold story, I think I did a not bad job of hopefully trying to kind of tell it all in a way that makes sense. But what I want to invite you to do is recognize that each one of us probably have an untold story. My untold story was the thing that I was most ashamed about. Why did my horses keep dying? Why was I having such bad luck with them? Why did I get kicked in the head? I knew that there was a reason. It didn't just happen because. I never believed that things happened just because, even when I was little, and I didn't quite recognize that there was a reason why. Or I did, I guess, and I knew that it wasn't just a coincidence, that it happened for a reason. And even though it took away time of me being with my family and my horses, what it gave me was something even greater, because I would have never basically dedicated my life, which is in part what I did. I never told anybody about this story of me being kicked in the head because I was ashamed of it. I thought I wasn't a good rider. I was 7 years old. But even at 7 years old, I believed that I already knew innately how to be with horses. And so this story that is untold within us, if you can hear that, there's some kids outside, my kids. But this story that's untold within us is our gift. It's the gift when we can discover the blessing that's within the curse. So with this, what is your untold story and I keep going here because it's in our heart, and it's the thing that we hide from most people because we feel too vulnerable to share it. And what I know to be true is my ability to share the story and these pieces and the pathways of finding the deeper truth and meaning of it has been the most freeing thing and the most fulfilling thing that I probably have ever done in my life, aside from maybe being able to bring 4 children into the world. So I guess that is the end of day 4's experience of the untold story, but I would love to hear your own version of the untold story, even if it's just in a word or two. Because if somebody would have asked me that question, all I would have written was, got kicked in the head by a horse. And yet, that would have been enough for me to recognize, wow, that's a really big thing. Because I didn't believe it was a really big thing. Like I said, I was ashamed of it and ashamed of most of the depths and the connections to it for a good part of my life up until this last year. So I will leave you with that because I could continue to talk forever. Stay tuned for day 5 and the rest of the 12 days of Christmas through the wisdom of the horses. Much love.